Now, the comparison I've got here is all the outer London boroughs. Now, you can't kid me that we've got a lot more licensed premises than anybody else. And I mean, even in our dearly beloved Redbridge, the licensing chair only gets £6,000. So I started to go a bit deeper. And I'm not knocking the work that anybody does at all. But the reg services people every 3 weeks have an agenda that starts at 7:30 and can sometimes go on till past 11. A lot of the work, as valuable as it is, done by the licensing committee is a small group of 3, I think it is.
Just 3.
Yeah. And they have to be picked on a very similar way to the adjudication review people, in that you can't sit on it if it's in your ward, if you know the applicant, blah, 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 blah. There we go. But more often than not, Roger, they're dealing with one item. You cannot, in all honesty, compare that with a whole agenda full of stuff. So it's actually a balance of that workload. Although they meet more frequently, say, than some of the other committees, the actual workload, when you really look at it, is a lot less. There might be a case for that chair to get slightly more than other chairs, but in all honesty, I really don't think there's a case to be made for it to be on a par with whatever we decide to allocate to a reg services chair. I just really do not. I'm not even certain that licensing committee vice chairman, oh no, I'll go on to adjudication review, should actually have an allowance anyway, because they very seldom chair. The small groups actually sit down and decide whether or not to grant a licence, and they also have to come up with the reasons why they support it or why they don't. That can be chaired by any one of the 3. It doesn't have to be a vice chair. So I'm not even convinced on that one. When it comes to adjudication and review, again, I've been on that committee, on and off that committee for years. I'm not convinced we actually need it. I'm wondering if that could actually be looked at and disbanded. The work that it does on standards can be done by the governance committee. The work that it does on, for instance, the ombudsman stats and the corporate performance indicators and all of that. I mean, I sat there the other night at the value committee, and it was a complete duplication of what we've previously done on adjudication and review. I think most of that work can be divvied out elsewhere, and we actually may not need that committee, and we're saved, even though it's only a small amount, an SRA. And I think that's me for a minute.
I think it also does, if someone's going to correct me, it also does housing reviews now. That's where all the housing reviews get done, an adjudication review. That's a new responsibility since
What
we brought,
housing reviews?
since we brought the organisation back in, to Havering, we brought that back into house. The reviews of housing have to be done in house now, and so my understanding is all the housing reviews, I'm looking at the chief executive here, they get done there.
They take the stage 3 housing reviews,
Yeah.
so that's it's the same stage.
They take the what? Sorry.
They take the stage 3 housing.
housing complaints.
There's a statutory process.
Yeah, but why can't, you know,
I'm just saying that we
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
But
but if that, say for instance that came under the auspice of governance,
Yeah.
members on governance can quickly get trained up on how to deal with these complaints. Or you could have a tranche of members, because it's 3 from, you know, representing different groups, blah, 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 from across the council. In my current group now, there are 4 fully trained members that could sit tomorrow and deal with any number of corporate complaints or housing complaints. That can still be done. If we really think about
And in 1 year with the garden, I might have sat as chairman 3 or 4 times, that's all. So I regularly agree that 2,000 is far too much. Sometimes those cases do take three plus hours, but I regularly agree there's not as much work as on the reg services. So that's all I need to say, okay?
Okay, and Councillor Ramsey, do you want to respond?
Yes, well, certainly look into those. As I've said before, if those points are made before tonight, we'll look at them before tonight, and I'll certainly look at them between now and next Wednesday, the council meeting. Take stock of what the licensing involved and discuss people who are involved in it. It is, of course, unlike regulated services, daytime meetings.
Yes.
And they are quasi-judicial. There's a difference, I suppose, between people who have to, who can come along in the evenings and still work, and those who have to undertake daytime meetings. There is that difference, but I'll certainly have a look at the points you've raised and give some thought to them.
Mind you, people shouldn't say, yes, I'll go on that committee if they've got a job of work to do up in the City of London, for instance, and can't get there during the day. I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it?
They're normally retired, aren't they?
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. And the other point on adjudication review?
Adjudication review, again, we'll have a look at it and re-examine the position. I mean, I think it's something which, you know, you need somebody to chair, you need somebody to accept responsibility for it. It is a big responsible position, and you can make a case as much for that as other positions of responsibility. But certainly look at the points that have been made.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morgan?
That's if you retain adjudication.
Yeah, we can look at that as well.
I think it's another situation where my recollection was we've argued about allowances for a number of years, and my view was that we will have a cross-party again review of these so that we can determine what the workload is compared to what allowances that again, and even with the changes that are being proposed, there does still seem to be a disparity amongst them. And of course, we're creating a new post in relation to the chair of the board, which is going to be an allowance twice that of a subcommittee chair. Have we actually worked out what that person's going to be doing that justifies twice the allowance? I suspect we haven't, because there's probably not a lot to go on at this stage. At the time when we're starting off a review with all of our staff in terms of their paying conditions, and with what I've sort of gained so far, we're going to be looking closely at making sure whatever extras staff get, that we do get value for money. I think we need to be setting an example and doing the same. I still believe that the allowances in some cases that are being proposed are far higher than the work justifies, and I think that our residents, given the fact that we're going to be asking them come next February to pay extra 2% plus all the cuts, and we'll probably be asking them for 2% the year after that, the year after that. I think we need to be setting an example and a lead, rather than still in some cases paying rather high allowances, where I have to say, having done quite a few of the roles, I don't think the levels being proposed justify it.
Well, something along these lines has been discussed with the group leaders since the elections, and I imagine, I'm sure, obviously you haven't been party to that, so there has been an attempt to discuss on a cross-party basis these proposals. We couldn't actually, and I have to say, there's been no dramatic request to change. It was well known when we discussed things that we would be, when we discussed the division of the chairs of overview and scrutiny and how we do that, that we will be proposing a board and we'd be proposing subcommittees, and there would be a considerable reduction on that restructuring. So that has been discussed between the groups. You may not personally have been a party to it, but it has been discussed. And, you know, even now, quite content to take away points that people raise and to look at them. Because it's much, much better if we can get a consensus, particularly with the allowance pro rata between all the groups now. There's nothing sort of like them and us situation to try and get it right. And maybe we haven't got it right, but you know, I'm quite happy to try and get it right. So far as the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Board is concerned, I have to repeat that we are losing one Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and the chair will be the chair of another Overview and Scrutiny Subcommittee. So the actual cost will not be extra. However, as we are required by law to do, we have had to have regard to the external scheme. And the external scheme says that where you have a Principal Overview and Scrutiny Committee chair and you have subcommittees, as we now have if it goes through full council, then the range for the Overview and Scrutiny Board chairman, depending upon how bullish you are about it, goes from £15,468 to £35,128. And we have gone for the 14,408 figure, which is, there's the same relationship to the 15,468 figure, as does the Leader of the Principal Opposition, and as does the Chair of the Licensing and Regulatory Services Committee. So there is a complete consistency in our approach in having regard and relating what we have proposed to the London Council scheme recommendations. They're not just figures that are plucked out of the air. We have regard to them, but they bear the same relationship to them.
Did I correct you earlier on to say that all but one council follow these guidelines?
All but one council use, because it came up at London Council's Leaders Committee today, all but one council use that scheme as the independent review which they have to have regard to.
You stand by law.
The
So
only
this-
one,
this
yes,
counts
regulates,
not.
paragraph 2.6. Before, under Regulation 19 of the 2003 regulation, before an authority amends the scheme, you should have regard to recommendations made in relation to it by an independent remuneration panel. Now, all except London Borough of Barking and Dagenham use the London Independent Review Panel commissioned by London councils as their benchmark. London Borough of Barking and Dagenham have got their own local committee of worthies in the community who have a look at it and decide what they think their councillors are worth or not worth, as the case may be. All the rest of London go by this review panel. They don't necessarily, as we're not, they don't necessarily go to it, but they have regard to it in relation to the structure of what they're proposing, which is what we've done. And that's how, it wasn't just plucked out of the air, that's how the figure was put in for the overview. And that was, to be fair, what was said to all group leaders during June and July when we discussed this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Grant?
On regard of payment for Vice Chairman, I would have thought if you're going to make a payment of one form or another, it's better to have just the payment, basic payment, rather than a basic allowance, rather than for meetings attended just for administration reasons. I mean, you may argue what the amount should be, but it should be just a one-off allowance, just like councillors get and other chairmen get for administrative reasons. On regard of what everyone gets in special responsibility allowance as well, you could argue what that level should be, but we've accepted a particular level, and we have been discussing lowering allowances because of the cuts we're making, so we're sharing the burden. So what the level should be considered within the financial envelope